There is a peculiar smell to a racing paddock at dawn. Cold metal, rubber, and the faint, sweet ghost of fuel hanging in the still air before the engines wake. For more than a century, that smell has been the smell of oil pulled from deep beneath the earth. But listen closely to the men and women who build these machines, and you will hear them speaking of something new. A fuel not drilled but made, assembled molecule by molecule, from the air itself and from water and from clean electricity. They call it synthetic fuel, or simply e-fuel, and it may be one of the most quietly revolutionary ideas motorsport has ever entertained. The promise is beautifully simple. A liquid that behaves exactly like petrol, that roars, that burns, that thrills, yet returns to the atmosphere only the carbon that was taken from it to begin with. To understand why the sport is betting so heavily on this idea, we must first understand the problem it was born to solve. And that story begins not on the track at all, but in the wider world beyond it. Beyond the paddock gates, the world had begun to change its mind about the internal combustion engine. Governments across Europe and beyond drew up timetables to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars. And with every passing year, the pressure grew heavier, the questions sharper. If the road was turning away from burning fuel, what future could there possibly be for a sport built entirely upon it? For a machine whose very identity is the scream of a combustion engine, this was nothing less than an existential threat. The easy answer, many assumed, was electricity. Batteries, motors, silence. And yet those closest to the sport understood something the headlines often missed. The world holds well over 1 billion vehicles that already run on liquid fuel, and it will hold them for decades to come. Ships and aircraft and countless engines that no battery can easily replace. The question was never simply how to abandon combustion. It was whether combustion itself could be reinvented, made clean, made sustainable, made worthy of the century ahead. And it was here, wrestling with that very question, that Formula One saw not a threat, but an opportunity. For the sport had always thought of itself as more than mere entertainment. It was, at its heart, a laboratory travelling at 300 kilometres an hour, a place where ideas too costly, too radical for the ordinary world could be tested under the harshest scrutiny imaginable. And so the governing body made a declaration that would ripple far beyond the circuits. From the season of 2026, the engines of Formula One would run on fuel that was fully sustainable. Not partly, not as a gesture, entirely. It was a promise with teeth, a deadline written into the rules binding every team, every manufacturer to a single shared destination. But a promise is one thing. The chemistry of keeping it is quite another. To make a liquid that could satisfy the ferocious appetite of a modern power unit and do it without drilling a single drop from the ground, engineers would have to reach for elements scattered through the very air we breathe. The recipe in its simplest telling is almost impossibly elegant. Take carbon from the air itself, or from waste that would otherwise pollute. Take hydrogen split from ordinary water. Then, with energy drawn from the sun or the wind, bind them together into something that burns just like the petrol of old. A fuel conjured quite literally from air, water, and light. The engineers call it an electrofuel, or e-fuel for short, because at its beginning lies not a drill, but a spark of renewable electricity. And here is the heart of the promise. When such a fuel is burned, it releases only the carbon that was captured to create it in the first place. What goes up had already come down. A closed circle drawn in chemistry, where nothing new is added to the burden of the sky. In theory, a combustion engine could roar on as it always has, and yet leave the atmosphere no worse than it found it. But theory is a comfortable place. The laboratory bench is patient, forgiving, unhurried. A Formula One power unit is none of those things. And turning this beautiful idea into a liquid that could survive at 14,000 revolutions per minute would demand everything the sport's finest minds could muster. For the difference between a fuel that works in a beaker and a fuel that works in a racing engine is nothing short of enormous. Inside a Formula One power unit, the demands are almost cruel. The fuel must ignite with perfect timing again and again, thousands of times each second. It must resist knocking under crushing pressure. It must carry enough energy in every drop to hurl a car down straight at speeds that blur the eye. And it must do all of this while remaining stable, predictable, utterly reliable. A single flaw in the blend, and the engine falters, or worse, it destroys itself. So the chemists began their work, molecule by molecule, tuning the very structure of the fuel to behave exactly as a racing engine required, building in effect a bespoke liquid from scratch, atom by patient atom. It was less like refining oil and more like composing music, where every note had to fall precisely into place. And as those first synthetic blends were carried from the laboratory to the test bench, the sport held its breath. For if the promise was to mean anything at all, the fuel could not merely be clean, it had to be fast. So the first canisters arrived, sealed and unremarkable, holding a liquid that had never seen the inside of an oil well. It was poured into the tanks of engines strapped to the test bench, machines that measure every heartbeat of combustion, every flicker of pressure, every fraction of power delivered. And then the engineers did the only thing that mattered. They turned the key and they listened. The sound that answered was the sound they had prayed for, a clean, savage, familiar roar. No stutter, no hesitation, no sign that anything had changed at all. The engine did not know the difference. It simply ran and ran hard, exactly as it always had. On the dial before them, the numbers climbed toward the same fearsome heights. And in that moment, the chemists allowed themselves the smallest of smiles. The fuel was not only clean, it was quick. But a single run on a test bench is a whisper of proof. To convince a sport built on doubt, they would need far more. And the real trial was yet to come. One clean run proves a possibility. It does not prove a season. For a Formula One engine does not live in the gentle world of a single test. It lives in the punishing rhythm of an entire year. Race after race, continent after continent. From the desert heat of Bahrain to the cold, damp dawns of a European autumn. And so the engineers set out to break their own creation. They ran it hot, ran it cold, ran it for hours on end, hunting for the moment it would falter. They subjected the fuel to every cruelty the calendar could imagine. The searing temperatures, the crushing altitudes, the endless grinding hours of full throttle abuse. They wanted it to fail, because if it was going to fail, far better it happen here, on the bench, than on a Sunday afternoon before the eyes of the world. And run after run, the liquid held, stable, predictable, faithful. The same clean roar, the same savage numbers, week after simulated week. The promise was hardening now, from a fragile idea into something the sport could actually trust. And with that trust came a far bolder question. If this fuel could conquer the racetrack, what might it one day do for the cars sitting quietly in our own driveways? It is a question that stretches far beyond the pit lane, far beyond the finish flag on any given Sunday. Because the world does not drive Formula One cars. It drives the ordinary, the family saloon, the delivery van, the old hatchback, bought secondhand and cherished for a decade. There are more than 1 billion such machines on the roads of the earth today, every one of them built to breathe fuel, every one of them destined to outlive the promises made about its retirement. And here lay the quiet genius of the idea. This synthetic liquid asks nothing new of them. No new engine, no new tank, no costly reinvention of the car in your garage. Just a cleaner fluid poured into the very machine you already own. If the racetrack could prove it under the harshest conditions imaginable, then perhaps the same drop of chemistry could one day flow unnoticed through the humblest engine on the humblest street. The sport had begun as a proving ground. Now it was becoming something more, a rehearsal for a future the whole world might quietly share.